I think all of us understand that we have to finish the war as soon as possible, of course, not to lose people lives.
So this is the second video I've seen of President Zelensky looking very downtrodden and distraught and sending out what is in effect a warning signal that he's running out of time in this war against Russia.
We have to find and to prepare this plan and to put this plan on the table during months. We don't have too much time because we have a lot of wounded and dead people on the battlefield and through civilians.
It's now in its third year, and across the front line, as I will talk about later, Russia has been advancing since the end of the 2023 Ukrainian counteroffensive in a non-stop manner. Ukraine has gone from one defeat to the other. Morale is low, weapons are low, manpower is low. But this has been going on for a while, so the obvious question is, why is President Zelensky only now sounding the alarm that time is running out? Well, there's no question, because of what is going on with his biggest supporter and ally, the United States of America, particularly what's going on in the candidate run to the November elections. We witnessed the debate between President Biden and the Republican candidate Donald Trump, and the world was privy to the severity of Biden's mental decline, and it has caused the polling data to take quite an adverse turn in terms of the likelihood of Biden defeating Trump. Pressure has evidently mounted on Biden from within his own party to resign, and in what will likely go down as one of the most bizarre moments in US election history, President Biden, after stating just the day before on the Saturday that he is not resigning, in a complete shock to everybody, he announces his resignation in one of the most curious ways. Now, apparently, as it was reported in the Politico, the president's decision to drop out came on the 4th day of sequestration at his Shaw home in Delaware, because the President Biden had been isolating himself from COVID.
Beach house, and we did note he wasn't wearing a mask there when he came down the stairs, but it does appear once he gets in the car that he puts that mask on.
Puts the mask on. It appears that he might be getting a little help just getting into the car there. Hard to make out through the rain what exactly is going on there, but it does look like certainly that the president's feeling the effects of early in the stages of COVID. And
just hours before the president allegedly decided to abandon his bid, a new poll had put President Biden down 7 percentage points in Michigan, which was more than double the deficit he faced in the must-win state heading into last month's ruinous debate. But what made it so strange is that, as I said, just the day before, the president's position was that he was not stepping down. In fact, the New York Post reported that the president's staffers were, and I quote, caught off guard and did not see this coming. A staffer was quoted as saying, "We are all finding out by tweet. None of us understand what is happening." And it gets even more odd than that. Biden's campaign had put out an email seeking donations for Joe and Kamala some 8 minutes after Biden announced that he was ending his candidacy. And indeed, that withdrawal announcement came in the form of a letter that circled not in the newspaper, not in any official announcement, but circled on social media, on X, formerly Twitter to be specific, before the mainstream media picked it up. The letter was dated the 21st of July. It did not appear to be written on any presidential letterhead and did not even endorse his vice president, Kamala Harris. It seems that Biden's endorsement of Kamala came sometime later in a separate post. And this, of course, is leading to the speculation of whether President Biden really intended to step down and endorse Kamala Harris, or, as is the new conspiracy theory, whether those with the true power in Washington, the so-called deep state, orchestrated this and what is being called a soft coup to push Biden out. Now, Vivek Ramaswamy, a Republican candidate, made a prediction some time ago that this was what the Democrats are going to do. He called it a feigned retreat and that they always knew Biden could not beat Trump, and they were waiting until after the debate and the Republican National Convention to pull out Biden and put someone else in. So listen to this clip here he made some time ago.
Anybody notice when that next debate was scheduled? For a whole year, you have President Biden refusing to commit to a debate. Then all of a sudden, a 180-degree shift. You don't see that happen on a dime unless there's something else going on. That debate is set for June 27th to be hosted by CNN at CNN's headquarters with Jake Tapper and Dana Bash as the moderators with no live audience. That would be the equivalent of setting up a debate in the middle of Mississippi with Donald Trump and a live audience hosted by Fox News. Would they agree to that? No, but we've agreed to that now to them. But the most important part to pay attention to is the date of it. It's June 27th. That makes this the earliest presidential debate ever in recorded televised history of this country. And the first one ever to happen before the Democratic National Committee. The DNC is in August. The presidential debate is in June. What does that tell you? This is the final audition before Joe Biden actually gets to be the nominee. Right? They've set themselves up for a win-win. The expectations are so low. You got a senile man who the people around him were actually operating him as their puppet. I mean, this mistake we make, we rail against Joe Biden. It's a mistake to rail against Joe Biden because A, he is not really the president of the United States, not in any functional sense of the word. He's not operating as the president. He is a puppet for the managerial class sitting underneath him. But what they've done is they set the expectations so low that you've got the ultimate home court advantage. If he even exceeds those expectations a little bit in that debate, that's a win for them because then they reset this race. But if he doesn't, which is what I expect is going to happen, then he's out as the nominee, and that's when the real race begins. You want to wait for the talk about Gavin Newsom? That's a false target. Get ready for Michelle Obama. I think that's what's coming later this year. So whatever it is, what I want to tell you is this race has not yet begun. Feeling good and complacent, this is a feigned retreat. It's a tactic in warfare to lead the enemy to a false target precisely to trap them. That's what's happening.
And now, after he has been proven right, he has put forward another clip, another video clip, with another prediction where he doesn't even think Kamala will be the true Democratic nominee. He thinks someone else is going to take it.
I hate to say I told you so, but I did. It's now official that Joe Biden will not be the Democrat nominee for U.S. president. Best way to make predictions is just follow the incentives. He wasn't their best shot to win, and they knew it. But they intentionally waited until after the Republican convention, so they had full information on the vice president and to let the Republicans celebrate, when in fact they now want to give themselves their best shot. Everyone is saying it's now going to be Kamala Harris. Something tells me that isn't going to be the case this time. Take it from the guy who predicted this a year ago at the Republican debates when they called me a conspiracy theorist. This race hasn't even really started yet. That's the hard truth.
But given Biden's unprecedented withdrawal and the uncertainty of whether Kamala Harris has what it takes to defeat President Trump, it is no wonder why Zelensky has been making these very concerning and alarmist comments, effectively admitting that he is running out of time. The problem for Ukraine is when we look at the front line, it is hard to see any positive outcome for Ukraine if they are to enter into negotiations with Russia at this stage. Ukraine simply has not had a battlefield victory since 2022, in more than a year at least. In fact, Russian experts think that the dialogue between Washington and Moscow will likely open under a new White House administration, as was said by the president of the American University in Moscow in TASS newspaper. Mr. Lozansky, as is his name, also said that despite former President Trump's claims that he would have an easy time dispensing with Harris, the Democratic Party, he believes, is in a better spot without President Biden at the helm. But the outcome of the presidential election in the US is only one of three factors that I think is important for Ukraine's future and will seriously affect and possibly bring a very soon end to this war on favorable terms to Russia. The more obvious second factor is the current Russian advances are all over the front line, which I will touch on briefly later. But there's also a third element that has not gotten any coverage or much coverage at all, and which I will discuss nearer towards the end of this video. So TASS News Media reports that since the beginning of July, the Russian armed forces have liberated 9 settlements, while Ukraine in the last week lost more than 5,000 servicemen and over 220 pieces of equipment. Russia continues to exert strong pressure on the Ukraine armed forces and holds the initiative, which allows them to dictate where fighting occurs and achieve success. It is these difficult situations and constant failures that are pushing Ukraine and its Western allies toward peace, the experts cited believe. Another Russian military expert put it this way, in quotations, "The Ukrainian armed forces are in such a dire strait that any cessation in military assistance or reduction in the supply of personnel through mobilization could lead to the front crumbling." Even American experts, such as a professor at Cornell University of New York, said that Ukraine's military failures are forcing the West to be more realistic about how much help Ukraine needs to win. Support for the hard-line stance is waning around the world. These reports, to me, as I interpret it, reflect what I consider to be a current gradual collapse of the Ukraine armed forces on the front line. But I don't think this should be a surprise. I made this prediction a few months ago in a video entitled "Avdiivka, this is where this war will end." And in that video, I suggested, based on the expertise of Chinese military analysts, that Avdiivka would be the final major battle of this war, and after that, Ukraine, though they might continue to fight, they will not be able to put up any significant resistance anymore. And it did seem that after Avdiivka fell in mid-February of this year, the Western media had become quickly overcome with gloom and a flurry of articles predicting a Ukrainian collapse sometime later this year, unless sufficient military aid was provided in time. So for instance, Politico's article on the 3rd of April cited President Zelensky himself, who said that unless the multi-billion aid package is approved, soon his forces will have to go back, retreat step by step, but warned that some major cities could also be at risk of falling. But Politico itself went on to warn that, and I quote, "The sad truth is that even if the package is approved by the US Congress, a massive resupply may not be enough to prevent a major battlefield upset for Ukraine." Further, that such a setback, especially in the middle of election campaigns in America and Europe, could very well revive Western pressure for negotiations that would obviously favor Russia. Ukraine's Commander-in-Chief, General Syrskyi, also said in that same Politico article that there is a great risk of the front lines collapsing wherever Russian generals decide to focus their offensive. On the 13th of April, Business Insider echoed this warning along with the Daily Telegraph on the 18th of April. Al Jazeera then published their own version on the 20th of April as well. But all this begs the obvious question. Given the dire situation for the Ukrainian army on the front lines, and given what is going on in the US elections and the likelihood that Trump may be elected, is Ukraine more likely to face peaceful or peace negotiations as Western media and Zelensky likes to portray it, or are they really facing a total surrender to Russia?
Еще нихуя у вас там ебать народу было.
Asia Times reported on the July 2nd that the Ukraine war will, and I quote, "end in surrender and not a negotiated settlement." President Zelensky is unable to negotiate with President Putin due to a law he signed in 2022, likely under pressure from far-right factions who have stated that they will overthrow him if he were to agree to any concessions to Russia. As such, Zelensky's latest proposal is that although there can't be direct negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, there could be indirect negotiations through a third party who will serve as an intermediary, and propose that the United Nations could act as such a role. Asia Times views that this is a non-starter as warring states need to directly agree on ending a conflict. The failed Minsk agreements, it says, of 2014 and 2015 was a hybrid case where the deal was signed by Russia, Ukraine, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Ukraine refused to implement the deal, and the OSCE proved toothless and unwilling to try to enforce the Minsk Accords. This deal had the backing from Germany and France, although neither was a signatory or legally obliged in any manner to support the resulting deal. Asia Times views that Zelensky's proposal is just another smokescreen to deflect criticism of Ukraine not wanting a settlement with Russia. The most important players, it says, is the US, the UK, and they both strongly oppose any negotiations with Russia. But the pressure from the hard-right nationalists in Ukraine is significant. Evidence of this is seen in the firing of General Yuri Sodol, the top commander of Kiev's forces in the Kharkov area. He was accused by the Azov brigade leaders of killing more Ukrainians than Russians in the Kharkov battles. The Azov, which is a neo-Nazi battalion, took their message to the Rada, and Zelensky obliged them by firing Sodol. Since Sodol's dismissal, the article reports, the situation has worsened along the entire line of contact. Ukrainian battle losses are very high, with as many as 2,000 killed and wounded on some days. The Russians also say that Zelensky is not a viable negotiating partner because his term of office expired in May. But regardless, given the battlefield situation, the Russians no doubt figure that the time will soon come when the Ukrainian army either collapses or surrenders or both. But the third factor, the more elusive factor for Ukraine, is this.
Billions of EU assistance going to Ukraine are not free, they're loans, which Ukraine will default on.
Ukraine is teetering toward a disastrous default. With its economy damaged by war and the year's defense costs estimated to be $54.4 billion, Ukraine is on the brink of defaulting on $22.8 billion in debt. For Ukraine, debt is not an accounting exercise but represents the ability to defend its sovereignty and secure its future. At the start of the war, private investigators led by JP Morgan agreed to freeze Ukraine's debt repayments, but that agreement is set to expire in August. But now, both Ukraine and its lenders are racing to reach a last-minute deal to avoid default. Ukraine is demanding a 40% reduction in its debt obligation, and investors are willing to take only a 20% loss known in financial circles as a haircut. Asia Times reports that a country's ability to access credit markets plays an important role in determining the outcome of a war. In previous research, which was published in 2013, the author found that states with lower borrowing costs are significantly more likely to win their wars. Debt obviously allows states to mobilize more resources more quickly than they otherwise could. The cheaper the debt, the easier it is to access, the more resources that country can mobilize for its war effort. Because of this importance, states involved rarely default. The risk of losing access to credit markets is usually too high. Now, of course, there are exceptions, as it is true that both Russia and Iraq defaulted on their debts. Russia in 2022, but that was because sanctions made it impossible to make payments, and Saddam Hussein in the 1980s war against Iran. The difference is that both Iraq and Russia had substantial national resource wealth to draw upon, which is a luxury that Ukraine does not have. So given the situation for Ukraine, with three major events or scenarios working against them, the US election, the likelihood that Donald Trump will be elected, who has made it clear that he's going to end the war in Ukraine and start peace talks. The current situation on the battlefield, which seems no signs of changing and which currently has Russia advancing on several areas of the front and defense lines crumbling due to a lack of ammo and power and low morale. And thirdly, the impending debt obligations arriving in August, which may cause them to default. It is clear that the chances of Ukraine surviving past 2024, which I've said many times on my channel, is very, very slim. It is not necessary that Russia has to defeat the entire Ukrainian army. Even if Kamala Harris wins and she continues to support Ukraine, and even if the European countries waive Ukraine's debt obligations and give them some more time, Ukraine cannot keep going from one defeat to the next without serious diminishment of morale of its soldiers. Further, as I've said many times, the manpower problem cannot be solved easily or at all. Neither can the ammunition problem. That $60 billion aid package, I said it in an earlier video, is a morale boost package. Most of that money is staying in the United States, and the money that is supposed to go to Ukraine is still going to the United States to build and procure weapons. Who knows when that's going to arrive? And even if it does arrive, where are they? How are they going to get it to the front line without Russia destroying them with long-range missiles? And then where on the front line do they deploy the weapons? When Russia is advancing across a 1,000-kilometer front, opening new fronts in the north and advancing in several areas. Ukraine has absolutely no options left. Zelensky now sees this, and that's why he wants to sue for peace. But he's long past the stage where there will be negotiations on an even keel basis. He's going to have to surrender unconditionally to Russia. Putin is going to get all of the goals of the special military operation achieved. That's my prediction.